Mr. Trichet, what was the involvement of the European Central Bank in the decision of the Irish government to seek a so-called Troika bailout, and did the ECB threaten sanctions if it wasn't sought?
I already responded to this question. We had, again, a situation which was totally dramatic.
Yes, okay. Let me be more specific then. In your letter to the Minister for Finance on the 19th of November, you said it is the position of the Governing Council that it is only if we receive in writing a commitment from the Irish Government vis-à-vis the Euro system on 4 points that we can authorise further provision of emergency liquidity. And then you say that a request must be sent to the Eurogroup. The request shall include the commitment to undertake decisive actions in the areas of fiscal consolidation, structural reforms and financial sector restructuring, what we call savage austerity in Ireland. Mr. Trichet, plain-speaking people in Ireland would call that blackmail. Would that be justified?
Sir, we had helped Ireland more than any other country. It seems to me that there is something which is missed here. We were the institution which was helping Ireland much more than any other central bank did for any country. In the case of the United States, the Fed would not have $4 trillion in its own balance sheet at the moment we are speaking, but if the Fed would have done for the United States of America what we have done for Ireland, the Fed would have been probably something like 10 trillion, 12 trillion, 13 trillion. So we have to have that in mind. Second, what is not clear enough in your observation is that the relationship with Brian was extraordinarily confident. Brian knew that we were helping Ireland more than any other country. We had a lot of discussion on that. He was thanking me for the help he received, and he was in favor, of course, of a recovery program, of a good plan that would permit to put Ireland back on its feet. So it's nothing to do with the kind of presentation one could make. It's exactly the contrary. We were together on the same side, trying to get out of a situation which was unfortunately the most dramatic you could imagine, and it succeeded. Yes. We are in a situation where you get out of that remarkably well.
The question, Mr. Trichet, is were you there to save the Irish people, or were you primarily interested in saving the big European bankers who were heavily exposed in Ireland? And up to 2008, capitalist European bankers and bondholders, as you know, gambled wildly and speculated on commercial and residential property, and created a huge bubble in pursuit of super profits. Now, that is what capitalists do in the financial markets. But when their gambles crashed, Mr. Trichet, how do you justify placing their massive burden of private debt, onto the shoulders of the Irish people who had no hand, act or part in their dealings? How do you justify the taking of 60 billion from the public services and the living standards of our people, putting them into the European financial markets? How do you justify that morally?
You have a very, very important question, of course, and which is more general, because the question is asked to all governments the world over, and particularly to all, I would say, advanced economy, because we are speaking of a crisis of the advanced economy which started in New York, as you know, with the subprime and with Lehman Brothers. And that has happened everywhere. And I fully agree with you. This speculation was totally unleashed. Ireland was very unfortunately a case in point, as were unfortunately all financial markets in the world. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this generalization of the drama to all advanced economy of the world. So the question is absolutely right and absolutely good in all the advanced economies. The only issue is, have we been better off for our fellow citizens if we had had the Great Depression 29 and 30 like? In which situation would have been our people if we would have had the Great Depression? In the opinion of, to my knowledge, all governments, without any exception, they all considered, it's not the Irish government particularly, they all considered that it would have been much more dramatic and that it was good for us to avoid the dramatic Great Depression. That's all what I can say. But never again. I fully agree with you. Never again.
Well, Mr. Trichet, you didn't address if it's moral, just and right that the private debts of bankers, because of their reckless activity, should be put onto our people and 7 years of massive austerity. And my last question to you, Mr. Trichet, you spoke about a consensus in late 2010 that essentially burning bondholders was too risky. Can I ask you, Mr. Trichet, who was the consensus with? Because I would suggest to you that perhaps hundreds of millions of European citizens would agree that the big financial institutions should take a hit, not ordinary working people. And you spoke about democratic accountability and legitimacy in your address. Can I ask you, how is it democratic that faceless, unelected financial speculators in the so-called financial markets can dictate to elected governments, can dictate it to the ECB that they should not be burned out, or that they should be compensated for their gambling, and that the majority should suffer? How is that democratic in the European Union?
In the European Union and in the rest of the world, because again, we are speaking of a drama which has gone in the US, in the UK, and was anticipated, if I may, with the Japanese problem. So the question you are asking are very good ones. They have been examined by the international community as a whole, because the problem that you are asking has been considered by every nation in the circumstances. And the response was, we were taking the least bad decision, taking into account that the possible event would have been an absolute drama of a Great Depression in one particular country, in the advanced economy as a whole. And this was driving us to this blanket political guarantee I have been mentioning. You know pretty well that in the UK there has been nationalization of 2 banks, that in the US they have managed to avoid AIG, that in a number of other countries the various institutions were also, they avoided the drama. All that being said, why did we do that? I mean, I'm speaking of the governments because we were delivering ourselves liquidity, the central banks. The governments had to cope with the solvency issue. They did that because they wanted to avoid the much more dramatic consequence on their own people, on our fellow citizens. Should not be repeated. How should not repeat? How manage not to repeat that? The system must be much more solid. So we have improved at the level of the international community the prudentials considerably. We have improved the capital requirements. We have improved the liquidity ratio. We are tackling with a lot of other issues. I do not want to say that it's over. In my opinion, we are exactly at the middle of the road in terms of making the financial system much more resilient, much more solid to avoid to be placed in this ridiculous situation. And with a system much more solid, where you can have bankruptcy of an individual institution without putting the entire system at stake, you must have rules ex ante. And we have now rules ex ante in Europe in order to know in which order you are burning creditor A, creditor B, creditor C. Of course, first the shareholders, second a number of creditors that are not and in order to be sure that we know what to do in such circumstances. It is true that when Lehman Brothers collapsed, there was no such rules. The system was incredibly fragile. I gave you that my own mind was entirely after Lehman Brothers, concentrating on how to avoid the collapse of the House of Cards, because it was exactly what we had in front of us. So whether or not we have taken all the necessary decisions, drawing all the lessons of the crisis, is the right question. I would say we have taken a lot of them. We still have a lot of hard work to do. And it's true at the level of each nation, true at the level of Europe, true at the level of the world.
Deputy Kieran O'Donnell.
I want to welcome Mr.